So in my last video, I talked about Sonic Riders, the bizarre hoverboard racing game Sega cooked up in the mid-2000s. Despite having a sharp learning curve, and with little in the game itself to help players learn how it all works, it made for an overall fun experience, with a lot of mechanical depth, a great sense of speed and flow, and topped off with extra goodies such as a variety of vehicles, or extreme gear rather, to alter the way of play, and a, to be expected for a Sonic game, fantastic soundtrack. And as I discovered after making that last video, the game actually got a pretty notable cult following since its release, more so than I initially thought. For example, did you know that there's a mod of the game that tweaked the balancing and added net play so it can be played on a competitive level? No, seriously, it's called Sonic Riders Tournament Edition. A bunch of people in the comments on the last video told me about this, and I gotta say, I had no idea Riders had a community that dedicated to it. Definitely makes me feel a lot more validated for enjoying this game so much over the years. But anyway, like I noted in the last video, Riders seemed to have sold well enough to convince Sega to continue the series. And sure enough, 2 years later, a sequel was released on the PS2 and Nintendo Wii, known as Sonic Riders Zero Gravity. Hey, that rhymed. The game was announced around the time I started using the internet a lot more, so while the first game I only discovered of close to its launch, I was able to keep up with whatever was being released online about Zero Gravity, and I was definitely quite excited for it. Zero Gravity launched literally a week after 2008 started, and little old me was incredibly grateful that we got Nintendo Wii the Christmas before, because I absolutely couldn't wait for this game. Well, that and Super Smash Bros. Brawl, but Zero Gravity came out first, so it was the priority. Now, while I came back to the first Riders a ton, I didn't find myself going back to Zero Gravity all that much. Initially, it was because of the game's use of tilt controls, which I really didn't like, but then I revisited the game years later with a GameCube controller and enjoyed it a whole lot more. But then we got a Wii U, which wasn't GameCube controller compatible aside from Smash 4, so Zero Gravity went back to picking up dust on our shelf. Long story short, it's been a long time since I last played Zero Gravity. So while I went into reviewing the first Riders, knowing I was most likely going to enjoy my time, I'm not too sure with this one. And with that said, what do you say we get started and see how things go? So unfortunately, Zero Gravity doesn't open with a beautifully animated intro, but instead begins with the story's opening cinematic. One of many meteorites comes crashing down into what looks like a bootleg Midgar, before becoming a glowy ring and bumping into this futuristic robot, which causes it and every other robot nearby to wake up and march out of the area? What?
Robots made by the leading security company, Mediotech, are no longer responding to commands and are running amok all over the world.
So basically, an entire company's supply of robots went berserk because one robot's foot got poked. We also learned that 1. Children are legally able to drive in the Sonic universe, and 2. Another one of the meteorites landed in front of Tails' house. Ain't that convenient. However, despite the meteorite being less glowy and thus inferior, the Mediotech robots end up attacking Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles for the meteorite anyway.
Brace yourself!
Wait, where did those extreme gears come from? Tails and Knuckles leave their flightless friend to fall to his death, but luckily for Sonic, the meteorite activates, revealing its power to manipulate gravity. The three of them go on the run from the robots before crossing paths with Amy, who also happens to have a meteorite. Ain't that convenient? Realizing the correlation between the meteorites and the robots, the four of them decide to go to Mediotech for answers. Though while trying to intrude one of Mediotech's factories... Okay, actually, is it Mediotech or Meteortech? Because the dialogue says
Mediotech.
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 but everywhere else it says Meteortech, and I'm very confused. Anyway, while trying to intrude the factory, the heroes are confronted by none other than the Babylon Rogues, who conveniently also have a meteorite. Seriously, what's with all these plot conveniences so far? What next? Eggman turns out to be the head of Mediotech?
What do you mean? I own this company!
I was joking! In all seriousness, as revealed in the Babylon Rogues' story, Jetwave and Storm actually stole the meteorite from a shrine Indiana Jones style, before witnessing the other meteorites falling, leading to one of my favorite bits in the game.
They say if you make a wish before it disappears, it'll come true.
How old are you? Grow up! Right, boss? Uh-oh.
Actually, on a related note, there is something I wanted to quickly address. In my last video, I referred to Jet, Wave, and Storm as just Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles but evil, but I should have clarified that that's not necessarily a bad thing. Honestly, while having simplistic personalities, the three of them do make for fun antagonists, especially with how expressive they can be. Then again, that's something that both Riders games excel in. That one face Sonic makes in the first game isn't one of a kind. Both the original and Zero Gravity are full of incredibly expressive animations, and it's pretty great, honestly. But getting back on topic, Wave discovers that the meteorite is one of 5 artifacts known as the Arcs of the Cosmos, and they were designed by the Babylonians as key components of Babylon Garden's engine unit. Oh yeah, by the way, Babylon Garden's canonically a spaceship now, and everyone seems to just kinda know that for some reason. Either way, the rogues decided to pursue the remaining arcs of the cosmos, which led them down Sonic's trail to the Mediotech factory. And yes, as I said before, Eggman is revealed to be the head of Mediotech, though surprisingly, he doesn't have any involvement with the robots rampaging. As Eggman reveals, he's been using one of the arcs as the core of Mediotech's mother computer. But since that one robot got the arc from the beginning, it's been able to override the mother computer's commands and take control of the other robots itself in an attempt to find the remaining arcs. From there, not a whole lot happens up until the final act of the story. In fact, a good chunk of this game's story is just exposition. No joke, there's a lot of exposition in this story, ranging from poetic inscriptions about the Babylonians' history to technobabble from characters who can't even say "I woke up" without making it needlessly wordy.
The sound of the impact woke me from my sleep.
Seriously, who talks like that? Eventually, Eggman gets his hands on the majority of the arcs, which, can I just say, he somehow snuck onto Jet's ship, and then into his meeting room, taking the arcs from right in front of Jet, and then leaving without any of the rogues noticing. Why does Eggman always rely on robots when he's clearly a master of tactical espionage? And the rogues meet up with Sonic and his friends in front of Mediotech's main base of operations. They all infiltrate the base and take the arcs from Eggman, only for Sonic to willingly give them to Jet for no real reason. And while the hero story ends on this note, the Babylon story, like in the first game, continues, as Tails realizes why the arcs were removed from Babylon Garden in the first place. As it turns out, the arcs were designed to manipulate gravity by forming black holes? What? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's how black holes work. Regardless, the arcs' combined power risked the creation of a massive black hole, hence their separation by the Babylonians. And just as Tails realizes that, the leader robot, who spontaneously combusted earlier in the story, shows up, steals the arcs, and brings them to Babylon Garden, resulting in, honestly, a pretty visually stunning cinematic, as Babylon Garden's true form is revealed and a planet-threatening black hole is formed.
The world is doomed.
Why yes, Eggman, that's absolutely going to protect you from a giant black hole. Wave notes that disconnecting the core unit of Babylon Garden's engine should stop the black hole, so the heroes and the rogues go in to do so, where they discover that the leader robot has literally fused with the core unit. This scenario has gotten ridiculous. Also, I've talked about this boss fight in a previous video, so I'll just quickly note that it's quite good, and definitely a step up from the Babylon Garden in the first game, and move on. After the core is destroyed, the black hole dissipates, and Sonic and his friends return to their normal lives. Now with the knowledge that the Babylonians are technically aliens, that's still really weird to be saying out loud. Also, Jet shows up to race Sonic again, and thus marks the end of the game's story. Gonna be honest, while there's definitely more going on in Zero Gravity's story, I do prefer the story of the original game. Yes, Zero Gravity has the better final act, without a doubt. But while the original writers was filled with plenty of cheesy, dumb fun, making it at least an entertaining story mode, Zero Gravity replaces most of that cheesy, dumb fun with, as I said earlier, way too much exposition. It definitely feels like this game's trying to take its story more seriously than the first game, and while yes, it does lead to, again, a far better climax, it also results in, admittedly, a pretty boring story mode. So at a base level, Zero Gravity follows the mold of the original game pretty closely, but it does make some pretty notable deviations from that initial formula. Some elements are unchanged, such as the on-foot bit at the start of each race, granted it's a little clunkier this time around, but details, as well as the speed, flight, and power archetype shortcuts, but others have changed a lot. I'll start off with the positive changes. First and foremost, the tutorialization in this game is infinitely better than before. For one, there's an actual tutorial that teaches each of the game's major mechanics, and in-game, there's far more use of prompts. And both of these combined definitely help make the game a lot easier for newer players. Excellent job with that, Sonic team. Additionally, the level up system from the first game has been removed, but it's been replaced with a system I honestly like much more. So instead of leveling up your stats and air gauge when you have enough rings, rings are now used to upgrade your extreme gear mid-race. Each extreme gear has their own set of upgrades, ranging from increasing your max speed, transforming your extreme gear into either a speed, flight, or power gear. Oh yeah, the archetypes aren't as directly tied to characters anymore, and other gear-specific upgrades. It's a great new system, and for the most part, it's incredibly simple to understand, once again adding to the accessibility Zero Gravity has over the original. Also, the levels have quite a bit more to them design-wise. Yeah, stuff like the air charging stations are gone, and there is one other issue I have with the levels that I'll go over later, but the tracks have far more branching paths and shortcuts than before, allowing for a lot of different ways to get through the race. It's definitely implemented on some tracks better than others, but overall, it's a neat way to expand on the game. The secret paths only accessible through gravity shifting, a mechanic I'll go into in a bit, were an especially fun addition. Now, all those were great changes to the game, without a doubt. However, and quite unfortunately, for every step this game takes forward, it also takes multiple steps back in other areas. For one, the air system has completely been changed. Instead of air, the game uses gravity points, or GP. It works similarly to air, but many elements of it have been changed or outright removed. I already mentioned the air charging stations, but to name another example, drifting has been completely reworked. In this game, you drift through gravity shifting, bringing your speed down and allowing you a chance to align yourself before launching forward. Now yes, it does make sharper turns technically easier, but it feels really clunky, and the slog of a speed you're at during this part doesn't help at all. This is made even worse when you factor in how stiff normal turning is, so you'll find yourself relying on the gravity shift turning quite a bit. But again, with how clunky it is, it's not really a good alternative. And to top it all off, the speed boost you get after doesn't really last all that long. In fact, this game in general feels a whole lot slower than the first game, and it's not helped by the fact that boosting was removed entirely. Yes, I know I said in the last video that the boost prompt in the UI would probably lead to boost spamming and quick loss of air, but I don't think just getting rid of the mechanic entirely was the solution. Because of this, the game doesn't really have any good catch-up mechanics. If you fall behind, you don't have a lot to work with in getting back up there. I mean, there's technically a new catch-up mechanic, but I've got different problems with that one, so I'll go over it in a moment. Continuing on with mechanics that have been altered for the worse, the trick system. Tricks in the original weren't the most well communicated, but they were really rewarding when pulled off correctly. In this game, you just press the A button when going off a ramp. Huh. It's pretty clear this change was made to simplify how tricks work, but if anything, I actually found it harder to pull off tricks in this game, because the timing of when to press A is really finicky. Some ramps I could get it perfectly every time, others I consistently get low trick ratings. I couldn't figure out the timing for the life of me. The trick system in the original worked fine, it just needed to be communicated better, not replaced with something overly simplistic that doesn't work very well. Also, turbulence is basically gone. It's still technically in the game, but it's such an infrequently present mechanic that it might as well just not be there at all. And I can't believe I'm saying this, but given how slow everything is and how easily AI can catch up, I actually found myself wishing the tornado traps from the first game were brought back. And now for that new catch-up mechanic. What we have here is the gravity dive, where your character takes to the air and flies forward at a greater speed than you're ever going to experience in the game otherwise. Now the problem with this mechanic is, again, in the controls. Turning while gravity diving is even stiffer than regular turning, so the only safe time to gravity dive is in straightaways. Fortunately, every track has a straightaway, but unfortunately, the straightaway's sole purpose is to use a gravity dive during it, making the gravity dive feel incredibly gimmicky. And if you choose not to use the gravity dive during these straightaways, well, hope you like doing a whole lot of nothing. That's the one problem I do have with the track design. There are way too many straightaways with absolutely nothing going on. Heck, there's times I literally put down the controller and I was perfectly fine. Now granted, yes, the gravity dive can be a helpful catch-up mechanic in certain circumstances. I actually snagged a few close wins with it during my sessions. But those are the key words. Certain circumstances. More often than not, it doesn't feel reliable, especially compared to the tools you had at your disposal in the first game. And that's my big underlying problem with Zero Gravity. While yes, they made the game more accessible and beginner-friendly, they also stripped a lot of the mechanical depth away. Because of that, I found myself getting bored with this game, and I quickly just wanted to go back to the original. Now, of course, much like the first game, there's other modes beyond normal races and story mode, so let's take a quick look at those. First off, Mission Mode makes its return, and it suffers from the same problems as the first game's mission mode. The missions, while having a somewhat larger variety, are still awfully repetitive, though in this case I found them even more tedious because of the less fun gameplay. Between that and the technical issues I hit while recording here, I did not get far in mission mode, so I didn't unlock the Sega guest characters. As for the other modes, we have Survival Relay, which is multiplayer exclusive, so I wasn't able to see what this game mode had to offer, but we do have two other modes to talk about. There's Survival Ball, which, gonna be honest, after playing 3 matches of this, I still have no idea how it works. Like, I get you're supposed to shoot the ball into the numbered goals to score that many points, but I have absolutely no clue how to get possession of the ball. You're supposed to use gravity shifting to grab the ball, but it only works sometimes? I don't know, the idea behind this mode is interesting, but it's just not executed well. And finally, there's Survival Battle, which is close to how battle mode in the original game was. And admittedly, while a bit clunky, I actually really liked this mode. It has you gathering weapons like missiles and bombs, and then using gravity shifting to shoot them at your opponents. And yeah, it's actually quite fun. Again, somewhat clunky, but it's definitely a better executed battle mode than the one from the original. Now onto the more technical stuff. I've got mixed feelings about the visuals, honestly. The areas technically look better, and the character models are no longer coated and polished, but the colors also look a lot more washed out, both in the characters and the environments. It makes the game far less interesting to look at, honestly. That said, much like the first game, Zero Gravity consistently runs at 60 FPS, and I never came across any glitches, so that's a plus. The voice acting's once again a bit hit or miss, though I would say it's overall better than in the first game. Also, for some reason, they once again use both Mike Pollock and Dean Bristow's voice for Eggman, which, as many people brought up in the comments on the last video, Bristow's audio was likely put into the first writers as a tribute, as Bristow had died the year before. Though in Zero Gravity's case, it feels more like they did it because the first game did. In fact, it's even more distracting this time around, since Mike Pollock also has original audio used in-game alongside Bristow's. So, kind of a weird choice in this case. And, just like before, we're gonna end this off on the game's strongest note, the soundtrack. I know I said in the last video that Riders 1 has one of the best OSTs in the entire series, but honestly, Zero Gravity's is even better. The levels all have dynamic music that alter after a gravity shift or gravity dive, which is a great touch. But then there's also songs like the main theme, the new and infinitely better rendition of the Babylon Rogues theme, heck, even the menu theme is a highlight. Seriously, Zero Gravity's soundtrack is phenomenal, and I highly recommend giving it a listen. But yeah, sorry if you were hoping for something positive again with this review. I know I was when going into this, but unfortunately, this game really didn't click with me like it did before. It's definitely got some great features. The gear upgrade was a cool system, the battle mode was surprisingly fun, and I do like the concept of incorporating gravity manipulation, but not only did it not work all that well from my experience, but the stripping away of mechanics from the first game made this one a lot less fun to revisit. If it wasn't obvious yet, I definitely prefer the original Sonic Riders. That said, despite these issues, Zero Gravity did manage to sell well, because, as I noted in the last video, Sega ended up doing one more Sonic Riders game 2 years later, Sonic Free Riders. Which, before you ask, no, my stance hasn't changed on the matter, I'm not reviewing it. And that should just be about everything. So with that said, this has been Black Mage Maverick, and until the next video, have a nice day, everybody.